Tonight, New South Wales shuts down. The Premier orders non-essential services to close within 48 hours. Good evening, I'm Juanita Phillips. This is ABC News Sunday. The Prime Minister launches a $66 billion stimulus package as the economy teeters on the brink.
We're a strong nation, we're a strong people. And in the months ahead, we're going to find out just how strong we are.
The AFL suspends its season after South Australia and Western Australia close their borders. And faith goes online. Religious services turn to the internet to keep the message alive. Life for every person in New South Wales is about to change profoundly. The Premier is ordering a statewide shutdown of non-essential services within 48 hours. Schools are also expected to shut in the coming days. It's been a day of extraordinary developments. The Prime Minister asked people to cancel all non-essential domestic travel. And he announced a second economic stimulus package worth $66 billion. That includes increased job seeker and welfare payments, payouts to small and medium businesses, and early access to superannuation for people in financial distress. But it was all overshadowed with news that some premiers are moving to put their states into lockdown. The Prime Minister is currently meeting with state leaders. They're discussing shutting everything except essential services. State political reporter Ashley Raper joins me now. Ashley, what did Gladys Berejiklian have to say before that meeting started?
Juanita, the Premier announced she would tell the National Cabinet that she's proceeding with a comprehensive shutdown of New South Wales. This is a shutdown, not a lockdown. It's designed to stop people interacting unless absolutely necessary. People can go and get fresh air. Authorities just don't want people congregating. So pubs, restaurants, cafes, cinemas, gyms and beauty services are among businesses that will shut. But supermarkets, petrol stations, pharmacies and home delivery services are deemed essential and will stay open. Health and emergency services workers will go to work as usual and public transport will also operate. It's understood that what will happen here is very similar to the shutdown in the UK, and that goes for schools. Tomorrow they will be open, but the Premier is expected to announce in the morning that they too will close, with some provisions to accommodate children of essential workers. Today's announcement had immediate effect. People started scrambling to shops and to prepare for what lies ahead. A shutdown that seemed inevitable to some proved sudden to others.
So it's like a real panic moment because back in the UK, obviously, that's all shut down and I was like, that's not going to happen here. Now it has.
It seems to be, it's going to be a lot worse than we're being told, and we just hope that we get enough food and we can just, the essential services like electricity and water, that they'll continue.
The state government insists essential services will remain open, although exactly what that includes isn't yet clear. Supermarkets and pharmacies will keep their doors open.
I think it's good to know that we are out there to help the people. As long as everyone realises please don't panic, that we will have enough stock coming in.
Restaurants, cafes and gyms will have to pull the shutters down.
I'm now shopping for hand weights and other resistance bands so that I can at least maintain some of those strength training exercises.
This is a move that will be felt by all.
It's devastating for us as a business, but I'm sure there's sunshine at the end of the tunnel somewhere when we do overcome this coronavirus.
Already some workers have been told they will no longer receive a paycheck.
It's a pretty sad news for everyone. We need to sit at home and we don't have any job.
While for some business owners, it takes the pressure off slightly.
We do have quite a few staff here, so in a way it is a bit of relief for us. You know, we get to keep everyone home and, deal with this situation. But, yeah, look, we don't know. Honestly, we don't know how to feel.
So could everybody on the beach please leave immediately?
The shutdown started on Sydney's beaches today after hundreds flouted social distancing on Friday. All were closed in the east and others followed, even though some people didn't pay attention.
Before the lifeguards started chasing everybody out, hundreds.
People were taking the piss a bit. But then again, I don't know. It's so hard. I can't really call on it.
But in Bondi, the data spoke for itself. Several of the state's 97 new cases were backpackers in the Bondi area, known to have been out and about. There are now more than 500 cases of coronavirus in New South Wales. Ashley Raper, ABC News, Sydney.
The Prime Minister says Australia is about to find out just how strong it is as a nation. And Scott Morrison has issued a warning that people who are cavalier about social distancing restrictions will face draconian measures. Here's political editor Andrew Probyn.
Facing a crisis that defies comprehension, Scott Morrison has become a wartime Prime Minister.
We cannot prevent all the many hardships, all the many sacrifices that we will face in the months ahead.
Every Australian is to be conscripted to the fight, young, old, fit and infirm.
It is very serious. It is deadly serious. And that's why I would appeal to them that they all have a role to play. People cannot be cavalier about these things.
Some people appear incapable or unwilling to heed the pleas or listen to the advice about social distancing. The Prime Minister warning it'll be forced on them.
State premiers and chief ministers may have to take far more draconian measures to enforce social distancing, particularly in areas of outbreaks.
And that's coming very soon. New South Wales and Victoria announcing a comprehensive shutdown of non-essential services. Over the next 48 hours, pubs, clubs, restaurants and some workplaces will be closed. Victoria will close schools from Tuesday. Other states and territories are expected to follow. So a lockdown looms, one that'll go for months.
There is no 2-week quick fix. There is no 4-week shutdown and it all goes away.
Exempt from shutdowns will be supermarkets, banks, pharmacies and petrol stations. Freight and home delivery will also continue. WA will turn some hotels into places of forced isolation for uncooperative coronavirus victims, while popular Rottnest Island will become a place for quarantine.
Western Australia is now in a war, the type of war we have never seen before.
Some states and territories are already closing borders amid strong advice to abandon non-essential travel.
It does mean those holidays that you might have been planning to take interstate over the school holidays, cancel them.
Some of these arrangements will be formalised during a hookup of state and federal leaders tonight. With Australia now on a war footing against an invisible enemy, consistency across jurisdictions is going to be important. New South Wales and Victoria know this and have forced the hand of National Cabinet. So expect schools and non-essential services across Australia to close this week. The country's resilience will be tested.
Together, Australia, we will get through this and we will emerge stronger. Thank you.
The nation hopes he's right. Andrew Probyn, ABC News, Canberra.
The government is boosting the unemployment benefit and giving some people early access to their super to help cushion the financial blow caused by COVID-19. Businesses will also be given cash to keep their workers on as part of a $66 billion package. Political reporter Jane Norman.
Framed as a safety net package, this second round of spending is less about stimulus and more about putting the economy on life support. An extra $66 billion to be spent propping up businesses while helping the many thousands of Australians who will lose their jobs.
It's focusing on those who are going to feel the first blows.
Those already on or soon to be on income support will get a massive boost, $550 a fortnight on top of the renamed New Start allowance. It's a temporary fix for anyone who finds themselves out of work, including sole traders and casuals.
This means anyone eligible for the maximum job seeker payment will now receive more than $1,100 a fortnight, effectively doubling the job seeker allowance.
Concession card holders and those receiving other assistance, including family tax benefits, the age pension and disability support pension, will be eligible for a $750 cash payment. That's on top of the handout announced in the first stimulus package, helping...
In total, $5.2 million Australians.
The most contentious measure, allowing those in financial stress to tap into their nest egg now. The government's giving eligible Australians early access to their superannuation, $10,000 this financial year and another $10,000 the next, all tax-free.
This is the people's money, and this is the time they need it most.
Billions will flow for businesses too. Small and medium businesses and charities with a turnover of up to $50 million will have access to cash payments of up to $100,000 to retain staff during the crisis. The government's also going part guarantor for unsecured loans of up to $250,000.
Labor has taken an approach to these issues that we will be constructive. We will be supportive of these measures.
That means this package and the one announced just 10 days ago will be legislated when Parliament resumes tomorrow. Combined with the Reserve Bank's intervention, it brings the total spend to $189 billion, a staggering figure that's likely to be a down payment on what's to come.
Shell-shocked small businesses have welcomed the government's stimulus package, but many of them have already had to cut staff and they're dreading the shutdowns to come. Some of them told Stephen Long that they need governments to help pay wages.
For 20 years, Glenn Boyland has owned and run Bluefish Restaurant at Sydney's Darling Harbour. He's never faced anything like the coronavirus shock.
I can't pay my rent, I can't pay my utilities. I've had to let go of all my casual staff. My permanents are doing as much as they possibly can. They've taken a small reduction in their wages, just to try and save the jobs as long as they possibly can.
When he watched the Treasurer and Prime Minister announce today's economic support package, he was buoyed by what he heard.
It started giving me the first step of some confidence that there's going to be a hope for us to be able to still be here in 4 or 5 months' time.
Then he realised it's not enough.
If it's close to 100,000 for my business, I may be able to keep going for 2-3 months. I'm waiting for the 4th, the 5th and the 6th stimulus package to come out.
In Adelaide, Sarah Oliver works in a boutique that's had to shed half its staff. She's hung on, but with less work, and may need income support such as the new coronavirus supplement.
It's been a huge shock, my hours and everything, so definitely going to have to be looking into something like that.
Glenn Boyland wants the government to pay workers wages, like in some countries overseas.
They're getting covered 60% of their salary in Germany, 80% in England. Go home, don't worry about anything for 12 months. That's saving our industry.
Though it's the biggest government intervention to support the economy we've ever seen, against a shock of this size, it can seem like a drop in the ocean. Stephen Long, ABC News.
A couple who got sick after being on board the Ruby Princess cruise ship say it should never have been allowed to sail. It's been revealed the same ship had just returned from a cruise during which 158 people reported feeling sick. 26 confirmed cases of COVID-19 have now been linked to the Ruby Princess. Martin and Leslie Kerr were told by staff no one had been sick on board the previous cruise. When they disembarked, they travelled home to Melbourne by train and plane, where Leslie later tested positive. Martin's results are pending.
Getting off the ship has been a huge bonus to us. Should we have been allowed? I don't think so, until they got a couple of results back, and if they were positive, then no, we should still be on the ship. But I'm glad I'm home.
Crew of the Ruby Princess are quarantined on board the ship, which remains off the Wollongong coast. In Italy, the death toll continues to rise dramatically, and the government there has introduced even tougher measures for a country that was already shut down. In the worst-hit region of Lombardy, all sport and physical activity has been banned outside, even if people are on their own. Italy has the world's highest death toll, and another 800 people died there on Saturday. The number of infections in Spain also jumped by 30%, and that country's Prime Minister says the worst is yet to come. Germany now has around 3,000 new cases a day. Bars and clubs are no longer allowed to open, and restaurants must close at 6 p.m. In Britain, Prime Minister Boris Johnson has warned coronavirus will overwhelm the hospital system unless everyone starts to practice social distancing and the vulnerable stay at home. He estimates the UK is 3 weeks behind Italy in terms of the pandemic, with more than 230 deaths. The United States is ramping up production of protective gear as the number of coronavirus cases there climbs. With more than 26,000 confirmed cases to date, healthcare workers are struggling with dwindling supplies. New York City is one of the hardest hit places. It'll be setting up field hospitals to treat the sick. North America correspondent James Glenday reports.
In emergency rooms across America, doctors are now preparing for the worst.
There's absolutely fear in the unknown, and as we see these numbers grow, it's very anxiety-inducing.
Due to a critical shortage of protective equipment, they're having to improvise to shield themselves from an unseen enemy.
My mask snapped while I was trying to take it off in between patients, and I had to staple it back.
Hey, your surgery's in OR4.
The actors from TV series Grey's Anatomy have donated their medical props to hospitals struggling with supplies.
You rock. We love you. Stay safe.
Some distilleries are shifting gears to produce hand sanitizer.
We normally use this still for gin production.
And several governors have been scouring the globe for extra gowns, gloves, masks and ventilators.
We're working on every level. Every piston is firing. Everything that can be done is being done.
But it could be some time before supply meets demand, so health officials in the hardest hit areas are trying to conserve what they can, urging Americans with mild cases to manage their symptoms alone.
Not every single person in the United States needs to get tested.
The Vice President is one exception to that rule. He was tested after a staff member fell ill. But for everyone else, social distancing is deemed the best measure. Nearly 1 in 4 Americans has now been told to stay home.
Because we all are potential transmitters of this virus, and we all, to some varying degree, are potential victims of this virus.
In Miami, hotels are being closed to ensure spring break partygoers get off the beaches. In California, one drive-through cinema has seen a spike in popularity, and in Maryland, drive-through confession was offered to worshippers. Here in Washington, the president's been repeatedly quizzed about why he didn't move sooner to try to stem this outbreak, and reacted angrily when it was suggested he'd badly mishandled things. Donald Trump claims reporters should instead be focused on his economic stimulus package.
It's so insulting when they write phony stories that they know are fake news.
His long-promised spending bill is still tied up in negotiations, though could pass on Monday. For many businesses who are already laying off staff, it can't come soon enough. James Glenday, ABC News, Washington.
China's efforts to get back to normal are being challenged by a rebound in COVID-19 cases. The government claims it has almost managed to completely stop the spread of coronavirus within its borders. But with thousands of expat Chinese fleeing the outbreak in other countries and heading home, new infections are on the rise. Here's China correspondent Bill Birtles.
While many countries have closed their borders, China's kept them open. But flying into the country is now an ordeal. Hours of temperature checks and paperwork before being bussed to quarantine hotels to spend 2 weeks locked in. In the city where the global pandemic started, there are signs of hope. Chinese figures are hard to verify, but the government claims there hasn't been a single new infection in Wuhan for 4 days. If that's true, the drop-off in new cases across China is a remarkable sign that strict measures do work. From a peak in February, the government claimed it had got down to just a handful of new cases last week. But now it's rising again, with dozens of incoming passengers each day bringing the virus with them. Here in Beijing, you get your temperature taken everywhere, but the streets are really bouncing back to life. Bars, cafes and shops are now all open, and the government has even dropped an order to wear face masks outside.
We went through the panic when the outbreak started, but we're slowly getting back to normal.
I'm still wearing a mask because even though things are better here, the outbreak is severe overseas.
Had China been able to contain the original outbreak earlier, its strategy to quash the virus completely may have worked. But with so many infections among citizens returning from abroad, it will need to keep up its border vigilance for a very long time. Bill Birtles, ABC News, Beijing.
The new travel restrictions have prompted the AFL to suspend its men's season until the end of May and call an end to this year's AFLW competition. The future of the A-League season is still under a cloud, but Rugby League says it will play on. Peter Lusted reports.
Australian sport was turned on its head today.
The AFL has moved to immediately suspend the 2020 Toyota AFL Premiership season.
With non-essential travel cancelled and borders closing in South Australia and Western Australia, the season was slipping away. News started to filter in during games.
So let's enjoy it while we've got it.
Then it was official. The AFL postponed until at least April, while the AFLW season declared over with no premiership winner.
To say that this is the most serious threat to our game in 100 years is an understatement.
The tightened restrictions also spell trouble for football. The FFA says it is assessing the ongoing operations of the A-League. Rugby League fans didn't exactly heed the health warnings today. The NRL is hoping the non-essential travel recommendation won't apply to its competition.
We're using chartered flights. We're not using the normal commercial domestic planes. So hopefully we'll be able to continue to travel.
They'll learn more after this evening's National Cabinet meeting.
And I'm gathering what happens there is going to be the decider whether the NRL goes forward and plays any games.
It may be the last game standing. Peter Lusted, ABC News.
2 more cases of coronavirus have been confirmed in a congregation of a church in the Sydney suburb of Ryde, bringing the total number there to 9. Like nearly everyone, religious organisations have had to take drastic measures to keep people safe. Today, worshippers across the country watch services online from their homes. Even funeral parlours have had to turn to the internet.
Hundreds of people would usually fill St Andrew's Cathedral on a Sunday morning. Today, the choir sang, but the pews sat empty.
In times of uncertainty, of anxiety and fearfulness, where can we turn?
The church has turned to the internet.
For this time, in order to play our part in the community, combating this disease, we've taken this unusual step.
Good morning, everyone.
Across Australia, Sunday service has been brought into the living room.
There's a sense of grief in our community and unknownness about the future. We have no idea how long we'll be doing this.
Yeah, we haven't had a church service at our dining table before. It's kind of a nice way of doing church when we can't actually be there in person.
It's not just faith that's being live streamed, but also funerals.
We have offered live streaming, but all of a sudden it's become an intrinsic part of each celebration.
For the family of Alan McIndoe, the online webcast was the only option.
My sister's devastated. She really, really wanted to be here.
Her sister Kylie has a respiratory illness, while his siblings live interstate, unable to travel.
People, being close together at a time when they're grieving and they might, feel like they need a bit of human comfort, that's just not possible.
Pews were wiped down and elbow bumps replaced hugs.
Life and love doesn't stop and death doesn't stop.
But under a shutdown, it's uncertain when memorials will be able to take place. Alison Shao, ABC News.
With so many people working from home in a bid to slow the spread of coronavirus, experts are warning it's not the only virus we should be watching out for. There's been a surge in the online variety as the world's cyber criminals move to cash in on the crisis. The National Cyber Spy Agency is warning Australians and their businesses are at risk. It's urging people to pay more attention to cyber security.
Coronavirus is disrupting society in profound ways, and cyber criminals are positioned to benefit.
People stressed, doing things quickly in a panic mode, that's a great time for a cyber criminal to come in and you're just not concentrating and you click on the wrong link and whammo, everything can be gone.
Hackers are using COVID-themed emails and text messages to steal things like private information and banking details. This text message, purporting to be from the government, is just one of those doing the rounds.
I think there is an uptick. I'd be suggesting right now people be cyber alert but not cyber alarmed.
Australia's Cyber Spy Agency wants people to stay ahead of the scammers, with one industry in particular told to watch out.
Obviously, we need to make sure that people in the health sector are paying really good attention to their cybersecurity because they are of increasing criticality across society.
All industries are vulnerable, but you just know that people are going to target the area where people are going the most. So you can imagine health, banking, people looking at their superannuation funds.
Just like good hand hygiene, good cyber hygiene can keep a virus at bay.
Time when we know there could be increased opportunism from bad actors, organisations are all being encouraged to just ensure that basic hygiene's in place. Patch your servers, make sure that you're paying attention to the advice we put out on cyber.gov.au.
While money scams are the biggest risk for small business and people working from home, larger organisations are bracing for acts of cyber espionage. Cybersecurity firms around the world are reporting instances of state-sponsored hacking, some targeting officials with booby-trapped documents pretending to be about coronavirus. The global thirst for information is also the perfect petri dish for disinformation campaigns. Experts are warning people not to swallow social media content without question. The advice to avoid infection is simple. Wash your hands and think before you click. Siobhan Henu, ABC News.
And later this hour, a special program presented by Insider's host David Speers.
After the news tonight, I'll be interviewing the Prime Minister about the planned shutdowns and how the government's managing these extreme challenges. How will this new $66 billion rescue package work? As well as speaking to Scott Morrison, we'll talk to the sectors hardest hit by this unprecedented crisis.
First, there were the fires, now coronavirus. It's been a very rough start to the year in the state's bushfire-ravaged communities, many of which are so reliant on tourism. In the Northern Tablelands, Blue Mountains and the Hunter, accommodation occupancy rates have plummeted to below 20%. In the Shoalhaven, hopes of a bumper Easter have been dashed by numerous cancellations. The ABC's bushfire recovery reporter, Philippa McDonald, reports.
The caravan parks of Lake Conjola are a haven for thousands, but for much of January they were cut off when this region was devastated by bushfires. Then came the floods and the tourists had just started to come back again.
Lots of people are getting down here to enjoy this piece of paradise.
Pretty devastating what happens to the locals. So to come down and try and put a little bit of money back in the local economy.
But this week, everything's changed. Coronavirus is keeping people home. Rick Stein's restaurant at Mollymook is usually a lot busier.
The views are beautiful, but, you know, we're probably about 50% down. We've had 30 cancellations last night.
The impact on local jobs could be drastic.
We're doing everything we can to keep operating for all our staff. You know, we're one of the highest employers of locals.
Berry too was just recovering from the bushfires, which had slashed many businesses' incomes by around 40%.
We do get quite busy coming into winter with people coming down for weddings and also for the wineries we have locally, but unfortunately it looks like that's not coming.
Lee Saunders owns the local IGA.
We're just trying to keep up with the staples and keep everybody going.
Communities here in the Shoalhaven had been looking forward to Easter for a much-needed economic boost. Now some business operators say they'll need an injection of cash to stay afloat.
Easter's big down here. We have the Easter parade and Blessing of the Fleet and the princesses, and that's all been cancelled, and that brings in a lot of income for a lot of people.
It's a spectacular location, but the vines are deceiving. At Cupid's Winery, the grapes got tainted by bushfire smoke.
With the bushfires, it was, really low income during that time, so we're probably down about $500,000 in sales. And then with the winemaking, we just pretty much don't have a vintage this year.
But bushfire recovery has now been overtaken by a health crisis of unknown proportions.
Pretty worried about the future. It's really a lot of uncertainty at the moment about how long this thing's going to go for. Whether we can keep trading as a hospitality business.
A small silver lining is some city dwellers are looking to the country to self-isolate. Philippa McDonald, ABC News.
Now to the next in our series, Sydney 2020, an in-depth look at what the Australian dream means to people living right across the city. Tonight, we look at the struggle many people face affording rent. That struggle is about to get a lot harder as the coronavirus effect takes hold. Already in Western Sydney, 30% of people are defined as living under rental stress. In the large migrant population, it's a huge concern. The ABC's Mridula Amin spent time with a family of Syrian refugees, the Hamlikos. The family of 7 has lived in 5 houses in 5 years as they search for affordable and secure accommodation.
The Australian dream has long been a quarter-acre block where children can run free. But the Hamliko family just wants to stay in one place for longer than a few months. For now, home is Tregear in Sydney's west.
I live in Australia now 5 years and a half, but I changed 5 times my house. It's very difficult for me and for my children, for school.
10-year-old Nijafan and 9-year-old John are used to putting on a different school uniform nearly every year, but they're sick of being the new kids.
I don't want to leave because, it's fun. It's better than the other ones and better friends.
Their mother Maziat can't guarantee anything. The search for affordable rent has meant a life on the move.
I want to go to my school, no new school. He upset, but I say it's very hard every day. It's very hard for you and for us because I apply again for change house. I didn't sure if I don't sure if he stays same school or not. I didn't know.
The Hamlikos are constantly moving because of rental stress, which occurs when low-income earners spend more than 30% of their weekly budget on housing. They're not alone. According to a 2019 report, 30% of people in Western Sydney live in rental stress. Canterbury, Bankstown, Cumberland, Fairfield and the Blue Mountains were the hardest hit areas, and migrants on government support are one of the hardest hit groups.
When new arrival come to Australia or refugee arrive to Australia, real estate agent usually give them 6 months contract. And because he has no trust that their income is enough to keep paying the rent.
After 53 years working in Western Sydney schools, Dorothy Hodnott knows the dire impact a transient life can have on children.
Children who have very disrupted education, they have gaps in their learning. Those gaps grow if children have discontinuity in their lives and in their education when they're little. That, for the most part, that will affect their adult lives.
She says housing stress is one of the major reasons students don't finish a school year.
We are not breaking the cycle of poverty, and housing is an important part of that.
For many unable to secure a private rental, social housing is all that stands between them and the streets. But more than 60,000 people are on the wait list for social housing across the state. In the Western Sydney suburb of Fairfield, it takes more than 10 years to get a place. The Hamliko family did get a social housing place after 4 years of waiting. Maziat is grateful, but the house is far too small for a family of 7, and her 2 eldest children had to move out. So she's waiting again for a bigger home.
Everything is very difficult when you moved too much. Yeah, I hope for next time I live and I didn't change this last time.
Mervat Al-Tarazi teaches migrants how to navigate the housing system.
Trying to find a small flat.
She says a home is the first sign of settlement in Australia.
So if I live in an area and I know the area, I know the market there, I know the schools there, I know the community there. So this is my country. Now I have my country. I know my neighbors, I know where to go.
Her clients often ask her if there's a way their rent payments could be used to pay off a house, given the difficulty of saving for a deposit.
I said, how? They said, if they offer a house for us and we pay weekly as we pay the rent, and for long term, this payment goes to the price of the house and the house will belong to us.
Outside New South Wales, it's possible. In the ACT, Queensland, Victoria and Western Australia, shared equity schemes are available to low-income earners. Tenants can split the cost of a property with the state government, and they can buy out the government's share at any point. But for many, ownership is a pipe dream. For them, the aspiration is stability and security.
If you live and there is under a ceiling, you will be happy. But if there is no ceiling, you feel that you never settle. You will move like from area to area, from house to house, and that's not good for people.
To sport now, and Newcastle skipper Mitchell Pearce has steered his side to a comfortable 42 points to 24 win over the Tigers. There were no crowds, but plenty of tries for the NRL's round 2.
The Knights travelled to the Tigers' spiritual home where the fans were locked out but couldn't stay away.
Balconies, standing on milk crates to look over the fence.
And Newcastle were quick off the mark with 2 tries.
Right little grubber into the in-goal area.
Gaping holes in West's defence led to Newcastle's 3rd try, and the visitors led by 6 points at the break. A well-placed bomb provided an opportunity for Edric Lee.
What a take! Edric!
The Tigers narrowed the margin to 2 points before Newcastle finished with a flurry, piling on 3 unanswered tries.
He deserves a try.
The Knights maintained their unbeaten start to the season with the 42 points to 24 win. Last night, the Storm defeated the Sharks at Cogra 12 points to 10. Cronulla was up by 2 points after a tryless first half. Both teams picked up the pace in the second half. Utility Billy Magoulas scored the Sharks' only try before the Storm answered.
Rower, quick play the ball. Kamutha, just like that.
And with 4 minutes left, Cronulla gave away a penalty and Cameron Smith delivered Melbourne its 2nd win from as many games this season. Chloe Hart, ABC News.
Honours have been split in the A-League Sydney derby, with the game at Parramatta finishing in a 1-1 draw. Sydney FC opened the scoring in the 35th minute when Adam Lafondra was able to pounce from close range. Western Sydney Wanderers answered late in the second half.
I'm not sure he knew too much about it, but he won't care about that.
The draw means the Wanderers didn't lose to the high-flying Sydney FC in any of the 3 games they played this season. Time to check the weather forecast now, and it was our last warm sunny day for quite a while, with a cool southerly change moving in this evening. Sydney reached a top of 30 degrees. It was dry, although there still could be a light shower later this evening in the city's west. The state's coldest spot was the Snowy Mountains, where the major centres went down to 4 or 5 degrees overnight. It was mainly dry and clear, apart from the odd light shower along the coast and the adjacent ranges. 33 was the state's top temperature in Narrabri. Around the capitals today, cool and showery in the southern cities, hot in Brisbane and Perth. Patchy cloud over the state's south associated with a weak cold front is not bringing any rain. Skies are mostly clear in the north under a ridge of high pressure. That cold front clipping the far southeast of the state will bring another surge of southerly winds to southern and central parts of the coast tonight, extending north tomorrow. There's an icy blast heading for Hobart tomorrow, and Melbourne and Canberra will also be very cold. Around New South Wales tomorrow, there's a good chance of showers in the state's east, especially on the north coast and ranges. Winds will be south to southeasterly, tending east to southeasterly about the ranges. Daytime temperatures below average across the state, tending well below average in the east. A strong wind warning has been issued for the Illawarra, Batemans and Eden coasts. Dry and mostly sunny in the west. Winds on Sydney waters south to southeasterly, reaching 25 knots. Sydney tomorrow will be much cooler than it was today, cloudy with the odd shower, and the maximum daytime temperature ranging from 20 to 23 degrees. The sun will rise at 7 a.m. and over the next week there'll be light showers all the way through to next Sunday. The highest falls will be on Wednesday and Thursday, and daytime temperatures will be in the low to mid-20s. Stand by now for an ABC News special, Coronavirus Shutdown, hosted by Insider's host David Speers, who will be joined by the Prime Minister.
Good evening and welcome to this ABC News special on the coronavirus crisis. I'm David Speers. This morning, the Prime Minister warned Australians that draconian measures were coming, and by lunchtime that was clear. Every state and territory is moving to shut down large parts of society. In New South Wales, that means non-essential services and business. Likewise in Victoria, where schools will also close on Tuesday. Several states and territories also confirmed they're closing their borders. And even the AFL has suspended its season and ended the AFLW season without a premier. The strict conditions came in a flurry of announcements this afternoon after Scott Morrison had unveiled a rescue package worth $66 billion, including welfare payments, stimulus for small business and early access to super. Tonight, we'll discuss the impact of today's economic announcements with a special panel of guests. And I'll also be joined by the ABC's political editor, Andrew Probyn. The Prime Minister and state and territory leaders are meeting right now to map out a path through this crisis. And I caught up with Scott Morrison ahead of that meeting. Prime Minister, thanks for your time this evening. I want to come to the big economic rescue package you've announced today in a moment. But can we start with, well, there's a bit of confusion on a few fronts as we sit here tonight. Let's start with movement. You announced today you're strongly advising against non-essential travel. What exactly does that mean?
That means if you don't need to go somewhere, you don't. If there is essential travel relating to your work, particularly it's in a critical area, if it's on a compassionate basis or if it's in relation to healthcare or things of that nature, then these are trips that you would need to undertake. But otherwise, whether it's discretionary travel, whether it's holiday or that sort of travel, the advice is very strongly against that, and particularly how far you're planning to go. If you're planning to go to interstate, if you're going to other far-flung places within the state, but even more closer to home.
I was going to ask you that. What about locally? Going to the
cafe?
You go
to the shops, you can do all of those sorts of things, provided the arrangements are in place where those places are open
Parks,
for business.
You can go for a walk, you can...
If you're not ill and if you're not in self-isolation, then you can obviously get about your life in that way. But when it comes to piling all the kids in the car and taking them 4 hours away, or getting on a plane and flying to the other side of the country, then no, we're saying that should not be done.
Okay, but then the states, a number of them at least this afternoon, have gone further than that. Well, let's start with non-essential businesses being shut down. Victoria, New South Wales and the ACT have said this will happen over the next 48 hours. Are you aware as Prime Minister what that involves?
Well, it's for them to explain how they're doing that specifically within their state as they're making those decisions.
Have they told you?
Yeah, well, I was been aware of this. Yes, we were having these discussions yesterday. The National Cabinet flagged last week, and I reported it at the press conference, that we were looking at additional measures that states would be taking within their own states to deal with the situation on the ground. Not all states are in the same position when it comes to the coronavirus. Some are much more advanced along the curve than others, and others are more vulnerable, like the Northern Territory or Tasmania, and they've taken their decisions. The point of the National Cabinet is not to have the same decisions in all the states, but to ensure that as a group that we're understanding the medical expert advice is being provided, and the states are applying the decisions that are best suited to their situation.
Is that working today? Because why have you got Daniel Andrews and Gladys Berejiklian announcing these big moves before tonight's meeting?
Well, they haven't set out the specifics, as I understand it, of all of these measures.
They've said they're going to shut down non-essential businesses.
They have indicated that they will be taking further action, and I flagged last Friday, and I again did so today, that I would anticipate that the states would be doing this very thing.
But at a local level, not a statewide level.
Well, whether they choose to take that to a statewide level is a matter for those states.
But why didn't they wait till tonight's meeting?
Tonight they will get further advice from the medical expert panel, and they are taking advice from their own health experts in their own states. And that health expert panel was meeting this afternoon, and I convened the meeting first thing this morning that we should meet tonight to consider their additional advice. But at the end of the day, David, the premiers and the chief ministers will make their own decisions about what happens on those issues in their states. The Commonwealth, the Prime Minister does not make those decisions, they do, and when they do, they will need to set out how that's going to work.
What about your announcement on advising against non-essential travel? Had that actually been agreed to by the National Cabinet?
Yes, we agreed that last night. I consulted the other states on those matters last night.
Individually or in the group, as a group?
Yeah, we have a way of communicating collectively.
Okay, but it had not actually gone to the full group meeting like you're having tonight?
It was all agreed to by all the states and territories last night.
So these states shutting down...
I wouldn't have announced it in those terms if I hadn't have done
Shutting down these non-essential businesses, though, is it clear to you, because a lot of people tonight might be wondering, do I go to work this week or not? You know, if I work in accounting or a lawyer, or do they go to work or not?
Well, my understanding is that workplaces have always been defined by the states as essential, and indeed the legislation that the Victorian government put together on gatherings, essential and non-essential gatherings, excluded workplaces, for example. But that said, David, as you know, many workplaces, including public sector workplaces, are engaging in rationing how many people are coming into an enclosed space on each day, and that helps actually reduce the pressure on public transport systems and reduce the proximity in which people are travelling together.
But from where we sit tonight,
that's all sensible arrangements. And one point I don't want people to lose here: Australians themselves need to exercise judgments about these issues on the weekend.
But they're trying to find out what to do just on work. Lawyers, accountants, administrators, should they be going to work this week?
Well, the states themselves will ultimately define what they consider essential, and
the
legislation that they have already considered and have been putting in place for the other bans excluded workplaces. But as I said, there is also the arrangements that workplaces should be seeking to put in place, like I'm putting in place in this very office. The number of people who can be in this office at any one time is 15.
Okay, but it's a little confusing with respect right now.
Well, it's 4 square metres per person in an enclosed space.
But if you're a lawyer,
workplaces should be seeking to try and manage that within their workplaces, unless for whatever reason there might be a manufacturing process, and in those cases those persons,
but above and beyond that,
would have suitable precautions put in place.
But you've got New South Wales and Victoria and the ACT saying non-essential businesses.
Well, you should put that to both of them.
You're not aware of what that means.
I'm working off the essential definition that they have been working on to date.
Which is?
Well, workplaces are exempt from that, but at the same time, David, 4 square metres per person within an enclosed space should also be observed.
But that's not the blanket ban they're talking about on non-essential businesses.
No, what they will be looking to do is take further measures on non-essential gatherings of people.
Have they told you what that means,
non-essential gatherings of people.
I'm just wondering whether, as Prime Minister...
David, and the medical expert advice will be provided to them, and I think that will provide them with greater clarity about how they're going to put that into place.
Is the National Cabinet process fracturing today?
No, I don't believe it is, David, because I think your expectations of what you think it will do may be overstated.
Well, just some clarity on who goes to work and not.
Well, and that will be provided by those states who are going to put those arrangements in place in their states.
Should they have waited till tonight?
Well, that is a matter for those individual states and territories, but this is not the only matters that we consider. I mean, the National Cabinet is dealing with everything from tenancy legislation to ensure that people don't get kicked out of their homes or out of their businesses, or they're working on ensuring that we're getting the right support into aged care facilities and hospitals, and how we manage the demand on ICUs and emergency departments. There are many issues that the National Cabinet is dealing with. Some of them are predominantly the responsibility of the Commonwealth Government, but many, I must say, are the province of the states. Now, they need to make the decision about how much further they go, and they need to make that, as I'm sure they are, on the basis of the health advice that they have and the specific situation in their states and territories.
Well, just on the health advice, Stan Andrews in Victoria says his state chief health officer has advised they should shut down schools early from Tuesday. That's not your advice, though, is it?
Well, the universal positions of all states and territories, including Premier Andrews, as recently as late last week, was that all schools should remain open.
That's changed now, though,
well, as I flagged at the time, David, if the advice changes into the future, then obviously the measures states and territories will take will also change. But what hasn't changed is that in a situation, if a state or territory was to move to make those decisions, it is vitally important that health workers and other essential workers are in a position to have their children to attend schools. Otherwise, you're taking out 30% of your health workforce.
Are you aware those provisions have been put in place in Victoria?
Well, I know that they are in New South Wales. I haven't had the opportunity to talk to the Premier Andrews
and this
today.
is what I'm getting to. Isn't this meant to be done through
we will
a national
speak tonight
cabinet
at the National Cabinet.
Why is
the National Cabinet, David, is the first time this has ever been put in place in our federal history. It works by agreement and consensus and voluntary participation by the premiers and chief ministers.
Are you annoyed at this Premier getting out this afternoon with this announcement on closing schools?
No, I'm not, because it's not for any leader to be getting annoyed about anything. It's about leaders being focused on the job they have ahead of them and respecting the job of other leaders. The Premier of Victoria has a responsibility to the people in his state, as does Premier Berejiklian have the responsibility to the people in her state.
Do you think...
And they need to make decisions that they believe are in the best interests of their state, and I trust them to do that. And where we can do that on a more consistent basis, then of course that is helpful. But at the end of the day, I respect their sovereignty in their own states. They will make their decisions and they will explain their decisions and they will implement them to the best of their ability.
So bottom line, should kids go to school this week?
Well, my kids will be going to school, and because that is the arrangement as I understand it in New South Wales, and if that were to change, then obviously that would be different, and the New South Wales Premier would make an announcement to that effect.
Do you think there's some frustration amongst the states that the National Cabinet isn't going to arrive at the position they want? That's why they're announcing this afternoon?
Well, it was the states themselves who were the most adamant about a collective and agreed position on schools. They were the ones insisting on that consistent position between them all. Now, if they want to make different decisions, again, they are entitled to do so. But what they are doing is letting the other states know what they are doing, whether it's the decision made by Premier Gutman, which was a very sound decision, which dealt with the greater vulnerabilities of a population in Tasmania regarding travel. The same absolutely with Chief Minister Gunner, who I've been working particularly closely with on the real dangers for remote communities. Every state, David, has different challenges. Their geography is different, their population is different, the rate of spread of the virus is different, their exposure to international flights at the outset of this virus is completely different. And so to think that there is a cookie-cutter, one-size-fits-all approach to every single state and territory is naive.
But there's obviously
and the
different
premiers are
health
not
advice.
naive, and the National
advice.
Cabinet is not naive.
Okay, but there's obviously different medical advice going to different
There
jurisdictions.
has been a consensus of advice on these issues.
Not on schools, though.
On schools,
Not today.
that has consistently come forward
The Premier says
to the National Cabinet, and if that consensus, which I imagine is being reviewed by the medical experts today, if there is a change in that consensus, then that will be relayed to the National Cabinet, and states will make their own decisions based on their own individual advice.
A couple of basics. Can you give assurance to Australians tonight that food and medicine will be available through this crisis? They don't need to panic?
Well, that is certainly what is occurring right now, David. I mean, the next 6 months...
Will it?
That is certainly the plans we're putting in place. And Australia is better prepared on those issues than most countries in the world. And as I've said, there is no need, as the medical experts have said, there is no need to rush out and do the things that we're seeing some weeks ago. But equally, I need to address this. The suggestion that you can just lock the country down, or a state, for 2 weeks or 4 weeks, and the virus passes, is naive, and it's false. That it will, at the end of that 2 or 4 weeks, and you ease restrictions, the virus just starts again. If you put arrangements in place that shut down large parts of the country and the economy, then you better be prepared to hold on to those arrangements for at least the next 6 months.
Does that mean you'd rather not?
It means that I'll follow the medical advice. It means that I'll ensure that when you do put things in place, that it should be proportionate to the risk and take into account these other factors. Because know this, if we lose health workers out of the system, then that will cost lives and it will cost thousands of jobs. And I am looking at all of those issues. And I know as we work together as a group of premiers, chief ministers and myself, we are looking to best balance all of those interests. It's not easy, David.
It's not.
State and territory premiers and chief ministers and prime ministers rarely agree. But I've got to say, As we've worked together through this crisis, we have sought to do that as much as we can.
Can I just ask you on food, though? Supermarkets have stopped most food home deliveries. Why can't
That's not related to a supply of food.
No, okay, but it would be important, right, if people have to stay at home?
Yeah, I got this question today.
Yeah, why can't we use, I don't know, the army or someone to help the supermarkets with
all of those options
deliveries?
are available, and what's called the National Coordinating Mechanism, that's where the Department of Home Affairs is working with the food suppliers, with the supermarket
So that'll be done
chains.
if it's necessary?
Absolutely, of course it will. I mean, I've already had the Defence Forces being deployed into the states to assist with medical checkups and chase-ups, contact tracing, because some states, particularly New South Wales, have become overwhelmed. Now, it's important that we provide that support, and we're there to help, and the Defence Forces are turning up now, just like they were during the bushfires, but it's a very different need.
And another basic question, some pretty horrible scenes out of Europe. Is our hospital system going to cope with what's coming?
Well, this depends on all Australians. If Australians choose not to self-isolate, if Australians choose to not observe the medical advice of keeping the distance that we've recommended, and then that we'll obviously be forced to take very draconian measures and shutting down, then if Australians don't play their part, they can't then believe that the system won't come under greater stress. And this is why we're trying to be so clear about this. Everybody, every Australian is enlisted against the fight against this virus. And if Australians don't do the right thing, then they are putting other lives at risk and other livelihoods at risk. Now, Italy is a very different situation to Australia. The United States is a very different situation. So we have different health systems, we have a different profile of population, we have different medical supports. Italy has a much older population, and the social behaviour in different countries is different. Australia, we have done 127,000 tests. We have the lowest rate of positive tests in the world, 99% of people testing negative. We have one of the highest rates of testing in the world.
Sure.
That means
but
our data is very strong,
such
which helps us plan
but clearly what
for
you're
the
saying,
impacts that are coming.
Clearly what you're saying is if people keep carrying on the way some of them have been, we're going to have a problem. Doesn't that underline the need to go a lot further with draconian steps to shut things down?
But that's what I'm telling you, David. That's exactly what I'm telling you.
Why not do that now?
Well, we will do that. And on the basis of that medical advice, looking at the data, and that data is changing. And as we've always foreshadowed, this is not new.
But you've got to look at the
Just
behaviour
because
of
some of the
people
media
too,
are catching up to what's happening doesn't mean the government hasn't already been acting on that basis. What we are doing, we foreshadowed. We said there would need to be measures, they would need to be scalable, they would need to be graded up, and that would mean if there is not a broad cooperation in the population.
There's not at the moment, is there?
Well, no, I wouldn't necessarily disagree with that. I wouldn't necessarily agree with that. I think many Australians are doing the right thing, but not enough. And if that continues to be the case, as we've flagged, states will have to take more severe measures. But I'm saying they just won't be for a couple of weeks. I mean, kids could lose their entire year of school. That's what's at stake here. I mean, there are very high-stake decisions. And there's a lot of opinions flying around based on oh, you just do this or you just do that. Well, understand that's going to cost people's health, their livelihoods, their children's schooling and education. There is a lot at stake here. Now, these impacts as they are felt, as I've said many times today, these are going to break the hearts of Australians, but we must be determined to ensure it does not break our spirit.
Let me turn to the economic announcement today.
Sure.
This is a big package. Perhaps we go through a few things. Casuals, sole traders, and even the Qantas workers, for example, who were just stood down. What do they get?
They will get access to the double job seeker payment. They will get the ability to access their own superannuation savings of up to $20,000 over the next 6 months. They will, because they would have access to this double job seeker payment.
Which is $1,100 a fortnight.
Right. A fortnight. They would also get potentially access to things like family tax benefit, rental assistance, and a whole range of other support mechanisms in the welfare system.
Immediately?
Pretty much. And that will come in two phases. There's the immediate payment that will come for them being on job seeker payment. There is the $750 payment, which all of those on job seeker payment would receive. That was from the package we announced a week ago. And then from then, the additional payments of $550, the supplement, kick in every fortnight. And if people that applies to sole traders whose business is down, they'll be able to do that while trying to keep their businesses alive. For those who are in casual employment and their hours reduce, that's there for them too. So what we've done is we've broadened the safety net and we've made it stronger because we know those who are going to be in that situation are in the front line of the impacts of what is occurring, and it's already happening now, and it is going to happen more in the future. And sorry to labour the point, but the more dramatic the measures we have to take to stop the spread of the virus, the more jobs will be lost.
Well, indeed. If people look at that number, $1,100 plus a few other benefits, depending on their situation, if they say it's not enough to cover my rent and my food bills and so on for the family, what happens?
Well, this is why we've provided access to people's savings, and that's a significant change. That's a significant change. But equally, one of the things the National Cabinet is working on is if someone's in rental, for example, that we are working to ensure that there is a ban under rental agreements that people could be thrown out of their tenancies if they can't meet their rent. The same would apply to commercial tenancies as well. Equally, we've been working with the banks to ensure that people can get mortgage relief in those circumstances, to reduce as many of their fixed costs. There'll be waivers that'll be on things like electricity and things like that from institutions. So we're all working to get all those prices and costs down and to increase the amount of support and payments that we can provide.
And what about students on youth allowance?
Youth allowance other is covered.
So they'll get the $1,100.
The youth allowance other is part of these payments, as is the single parenting payment.
Temporary visa holders, there's a whole bunch of them. They don't
under
normally get
special
social
benefit,
security.
they're covered.
So they'll get it as well.
Special benefit, those who are on special benefits, that's also included in this package.
So does that include a foreign student, for example, or?
Well, it all depends if they're on special benefit. Well, I mean, a foreign student wouldn't necessarily be on a benefit.
Okay. For the businesses, the small and medium-sized businesses, you've announced payments of up to $100,000 over the coming 6 months for them. When will they start to get that?
Oh, that will come in their BAS in April, and they can plan on that. No, it's about the 24th, I think.
So another month from now.
But the point about the business support is they know it's coming, and it's coming of what they've already got. In many parts of it's a rebate on what they're withholding off their payroll, and that will come over the next 6 months. So they have the certainty of what they know is going to happen with that withholding tax which they have on their payroll.
What do you think of Boris Johnson's idea?
Just before I go to that, because this is an important point, what we're doing is trying to give the businesses a lifeline to get over the next 6 months. And so our expectation is that these businesses we're supporting to do this, on the other side, that they will take those employees back. If they have to stand them down, well, we'll take them into the job seeker payment. We'll make sure the safety net is bigger and stronger. And if we have to do more, we'll do more.
All right, that's interesting.
Of course we will.
Okay.
Of course we will. I made that point very clear today. But on the other side, the businesses we've kept alive through these payments and other things we're doing, whether it's on the guaranteeing of loans with the banks and the holiday on repayments and these sorts of things. On the other side, this is the understanding, this is the moral agreement that on the other side, we want you to put those workers back on.
This probably won't be able to stop a recession though, will it?
Those sorts of things are now becoming academic. What I'm trying to do...
As in, it's going to happen.
That will be what it'll be. What I'm trying to do is save as many livelihoods and save as many lives as I possibly can. That is my daily mission.
Just two quick ones. Parliament, you did meet with Anthony Albanese today. What's going to happen with any further sittings of Parliament over the next, 6, 12 months?
Well, look, we're still working on that with the opposition. We had a very positive and constructive meeting today. We're working together in the spirit of a national crisis, and I have no doubt we'll be able to come to a very useful set of arrangements, which means that the Parliament can do the job it needs to do. How often it needs to do that, under what circumstances, we'll work through those details, but the discussions are very positive, and I thank the Leader of the Opposition for that.
Have you thought about putting him on your National Cabinet?
Well, the National Cabinet is made up of executive leaders of governments. It's not a cabinet of parliaments. It's a cabinet of governments.
Would it give more bipartisanship?
Well, there are 5 Labor members of the National Cabinet and there are 4 Liberal. It doesn't get any more bipartisan than that. And the unanimous view of the National Cabinet is it's got to be governments, because it's governments that are making decisions. It's governments that are providing payroll tax relief or changing tenancy laws. And it is a good tight group. It's working well together. It's going to have disagreements from time to time, but I tell you what, I'm glad it's there, and I'll be working night and day to keep it there. It's not going to agree on everything, but I can tell you it is making a big difference, and it's acting with a unity of spirit.
Prime Minister, thanks for your time tonight.
Thanks a lot, David.
And the National Cabinet the Prime Minister was referring to there is meeting as we speak. We're going to be talking in more detail about the economic package, that $66 billion package, with a panel of experts in a moment. I want to first bring in the ABC's political editor, Andrew Probyn, first, though. Andrew, I want to come first to the fact that the 2 big states, New South Wales and Victoria, the ACT jumped on board as well in saying that in the next 48 hours they will be shutting down non-essential businesses and services. Doing this before tonight's meeting is a bit strange. What's gone on there?
In effect, Victoria and New South Wales are locking in National Cabinet to a decision that was ordained by Victoria and New South Wales. As you say, the 2 biggest states, 50% of the population, more than 50% of the
forcing
population.
The hand of the National
Forcing the hand of National Cabinet.
Why? Because they were worried they wouldn't get their way in the meeting, or?
Time is of the essence in tackling this. The health crisis, as we've seen in the simple raw numbers, is showing that the longer we wait, the bigger the crisis becomes. A doubling of people infected, therefore a quadrupling of the challenge every week. So it's
let's hope it doesn't continue to quadruple every week.
Well, this is obviously what they're thinking. They do want to shut down, which can then drag into a lockdown.
And look, this is not a time for playing politics, but clearly listening to the Prime Minister, he's making very strong arguments in that interview about why shutting down is going to come at such a cost economically, to your kids' education, to the health workforce as well. He's making a powerful argument, really, not to necessarily shut down.
I thought he actually spelt out the consequence of lockdown pretty well. That said, I don't think he's actually. I think he's resisting it at the moment. It will eventually come, and I think it'll come this week, simply because of the intervention of Dan Andrews and Gladys Berejiklian. They've decided they're going to take it into their own hands. Victoria will shut schools from Tuesday. I can't see them reopening for many, many months.
And bottom line, either tonight, once they've finished this meeting, or first thing tomorrow, someone is going to have to clear up this list of what are essential and non-essential businesses, who's meant to be going to work and not.
We know that communications has been added to that list. We've heard that from the Managing Director of the ABC. We know from Scott Morrison, because he actually last week nominated a whole stack of industries, whether it be shopping centres, whether it be gas, electricity, those services. Gladys Berejiklian and Dan Andrews actually came up with a very consistent list themselves separately. So they've been in communication. Now, I understand that premiers and the Prime Minister do have their own methods of communicating outside of National Cabinet, and it's within this communication that the pressure has been put on the Prime Minister not to have the meeting on Tuesday as he had planned, as he had told us on Friday, no less, but drag it forward to today so that they can have some clarification, perhaps tonight even from the Prime Minister, but at least tomorrow, so that school kids can be told this is your last day.
Well, let's see what they come up with tonight and hope that there is some clarity around these things very quickly. On the economic package, it's a big deal. I think potentially the biggest stimulus or economic rescue package we've ever seen. $66 billion on top of what was announced only 10 days ago. We've seen in your story earlier some of the main elements of this. What do you think are the main concerns for the government right now about the economy?
Well, this is no longer about stimulus. This is all about keeping some lifeblood in government, inside business, while the economy effectively goes into stasis. because that's the consequence of a shutdown and a lockdown for a whole swathe of business. There has to be some blood kept within that business to keep them alive, to enliven the business for when shutdown is lifted. Now, we know that the government is hoping that it be 6 months. It's quite clear that if we have a massive, massive health crisis, it could actually be less than that, but we don't want that health crisis. We've got a tension here between a health crisis that could spike horribly in the next few weeks unless we get on top of it, or we have a crisis nonetheless, that goes for many, many months. The slower that crisis is, the longer it will be before businesses can get back to normal.
And that's why the Prime Minister is tonight talking about the next round of support.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. From the very start today, he said, look, this is not going to be the end of it.
No.
And we've gone from will they or won't they on surplus 2.5 weeks ago to suddenly talking about, it's going to be a deficit, suddenly to recession. It's virtually locked in. From your fascinating interview with the Prime Minister, he said it's academic. Now it's not, it's about trying to stop a depression, which is a sustained recession. And that is, it's horrific at a human life level, this challenge, but it's also horrific in an economic sense.
On another huge day in this crisis, ABC's political editor Andrew Probyn, thank you. I want to drill down a bit more detail now on this economic package and really what people can expect in terms of support. A lot of people have been keen to see the details. They're very worried about their prospects. Let's bring in our panel, Chris Richardson from Deloitte Access Economics, Jennifer Westacott, the head of the Business Council of Australia. I'm also joined by Cassandra Goldie from the Council of Social Service and Michelle O'Neill, the President of the ACTU. Thank you all for joining us this evening. Chris Richardson, can I go to you first? This is unprecedented, we keep on saying, but what do you think the economy really needs right now? Who needs support right now? And does today's package deliver it?
Today's package delivers a spectacular amount of support. But it's not enough. And Andrew said it a moment ago, the virus numbers are getting bigger in Australia, a factor of 4 every week. Roll forward 5 weeks, unless we can slow that down, the problem is 1,000 times bigger than today. So pretty much everything in the economic package today makes great sense. You know, we're fighting really hard to protect jobs, and if those jobs are lost, that welfare safety net is much, much better than it was. That is entirely to be applauded. The main game, though, remains health. If we can slow that stunning, that geometric speed at which this is going, the economy is better, our health is better, but it's a really, really hard balance to hit. We do need to preference health over immediate support for the economy. That is the main game.
Now, as I mentioned, a lot of workers, a lot of business owners as well are currently grappling with what to do. Jennifer Westacott, let me ask you, the level of support has grown for business today, the aim for them to be able to keep their staff on the books as much as possible. But as I say, a lot of particularly smaller and medium-sized businesses are weighing up if they don't have customers coming through the doors, how long can they keep operating? What do you make of the assistance today?
Look, I think it's the right package at the right time. I think it's focused on assisting the most vulnerable businesses, assisting the most vulnerable people, and it's sort of trying to put a floor into the economy. And there are some very important features in it. I think the cash flow assistance to small businesses, the $100,000 that's targeted to businesses to keep people working is hugely important. We've got to try and keep people in their jobs.
Just on that, is it enough to do that? Will it make the difference between staying open or not?
Well, it looks pretty big, but I think to Chris's point and to the Prime Minister's point, more is going to have to be done. The income support, which Cassandra will no doubt talk about, the job seeker assistance is very good, and the really good part of that package is giving it to people who've been stood down so that they get income support, but they can go back to their employment. We've got to have that capacity to bounce back. The access to super is very important. We're very pleased to see the more flexible insolvency arrangements that allow directors some relief, some regulatory relief, so they can keep working their companies. Look, I think the really crucial thing here, and it goes to Chris's point, is getting the right balance. Obviously, the top priority is to keep people safe. But we have got to keep our essential industries going, our manufacturing, our mining and resources, our financial services, our food production, our major retailers, not just the supermarkets, but the people who are selling cleaning products, the people who are selling office equipment so that people can work from home. We have to try and make sure that we have these safe workplaces, that we keep people safe, we keep our health system running, but at the same time that we've got that floor in the economy so that we can bounce back.
Just on the point you're making there, Jennifer Westacott, it sounds like an argument against locking down, shutting down wide parts of the economy. You're suggesting safe workplaces could still be protected.
It's not an argument against one thing or another. It's an argument that, I guess, goes to Chris's point and the Prime Minister's point, that this is a very delicate balancing act. And to the Prime Minister's point, whatever we do, we're doing it for quite a sustained period of time. And the primary objective is to keep people safe. But we also, to the Prime Minister's point today, lives and livelihoods, we have to have the capacity to keep those essential things that our economy needs to keep ticking over and that we need in order for people to live. And so, I think this is changing on a kind of constant basis. We have to kind of be as flexible as we can, but we do have to try and strike that balance between obviously the top priority to keep people safe, but making sure that we've got those economic underpinnings so that we can protect people's livelihoods and we can bounce back from this.
Cassandra Goldie, let me come to you. There's a fair bit there, in fact a doubling essentially of the dole, of the New Start payment while ever this continues. And that will apply to not only those who are currently on New Start, but also those who are soon to join it, as well as those who are stood down but not made redundant entirely from their employer. Sole traders, casuals as well. Perhaps you could explain to us what that's going to mean for those. Many people, I've been talking to people, you've been talking to people who are worried about the work drying up and what they're facing. What do they get today?
Well, look, it's a huge relief to see finally this recognition that New Start was never going to be enough. $40 was never going to be enough for the almost 1 million people who have been trying to live in it already. And now, of course, many, many more people really worried about that. So there's a huge relief that we're seeing this doubling of the payment. And of course, we'll continue to urge the government to make sure that this is a longer term direction that we're seeing in terms of a substantial increase to New Start. Look, we're really worried about, there are some significant groups that are not included in this particular announcement today, particularly flagging for carers and people with disability who are on the higher pension, but many are in contact with us saying we're really, really worried, very, very vulnerable. And the point, David, you asked about students, that's not our understanding that full-time students will be included in this, nor international students, so we're going to urgently follow up on that.
Well,
and asylum
just,
seekers
sorry, just
who
on
are...
that, the PM did say students on youth allowance would get it.
Yes, but that's not our understanding, David. So if the Prime Minister, that's his intention, we'll certainly follow up urgently, because the numbers don't stack up in terms of who's currently accessing special benefit from the large number of international students who, obviously they're now here with us, won't be able to leave. We just need to make sure asylum seekers included. There's about 7,000 of those asylum seekers who don't have any social security rights at the moment. We're just going to make sure that we've got the coverage we need, and so we're going to really continue to talk to the government and urge them to fix those crucial gaps. Look, the standing down measure, I know Michelle's going to talk about this. We do want to make sure that that connection to work is retained for anybody possible, and to make sure that industry assistance is going into keeping people in jobs and wages and keeping services going.
Well, Michelle O'Neill, you're the president of the ACTU. You obviously have concerns about full-time casual, all sorts of workers here whose jobs are at stake. What do you make of the measures today that have been announced?
David, we welcome the fact that finally the government has recognised that casual workers, contract workers, gig workers need to be able to have a safety net to ensure that they're safe, that they keep an income coming to them. So the measures that have doubled, in effect, the New Start allowance with the additional allowance of the coronavirus money is welcomed, but we are concerned about whether that's going to reach everybody. It needs to cover workers that are being stood down without pay, and of course it also needs funds to cover the 1.4 million workers in Australia on short-term visas that can't leave the country. The other things we are very worried about is that the measures that go towards supporting business seem to have been done in a way that really is skewed towards potentially the highest paid, because instead of it being a wage subsidy, which is really what's needed, it's actually a measure that allows tax to be averted by the business. 70% of the measures announced today go to business, and there is no guarantee, no absolute guarantee by those businesses that are going to get that money that they're going to keep people in jobs. And of course they'll get more money for the highest paid. So the lower paid you are, and if you're in fact in the tax-free threshold, the government will give nothing to the employer to keep you in a job. So there's a very real risk, and it's a regressive measure that means that the higher paid people, the company will get more money to keep those people on and less money for those on the lowest pays.
I take your point about the equity thing there, the equity issue there, that yes, there will be more kept by the business that pays a worker a lot more, but isn't the counter-argument to that that you want to keep that tie between the worker and the employer? As we go through this crisis, you want to, even the higher income earners, you want them to be able to be connected to their employer, not let go altogether.
Oh, absolutely, and we agree with that, but that's the problem with the measure, because there is not a direct guarantee. We're seeing billions of dollars of government money go into the business sector without requiring guarantees that people are kept in jobs and that they're kept paid.
So you'd rather
now that needs to be across
subsidy,
all employees.
A flat wage subsidy, regardless of how much someone earns.
Oh, we think the measures introduced by Boris Johnson in the UK, where there's an 80% wage subsidy that goes directly to all of the workers, there's a limit on that. It's about the equivalent of 5,000 Australian dollars a month. But that is essential because it requires the company to keep people in jobs. This measure, and you heard Scott Morrison answer your questions, he talked about we would hope that businesses give people jobs at the end of this. Well, that's not good enough. We need to keep the economy running. Okay, we need to keep people in employment.
I thought he made an argument that it will actually encourage employers to keep on their workers. Jennifer Westacott, let me get your thoughts on that point. Is the way this has been structured going to mean they have to keep the workers?
That's exactly how it's been designed, to keep people working, and that's why we welcome it. And look, it's not in the interests of companies to sort of see their workers gone and not have a capacity to bounce back and not have a capacity to come back from this. So this is why what's really good about today's package is the set of complementary measures. So income support for people who've been stood down, but so that it allows them to come back to work without having to take a redundancy package, which means going back to work is very difficult. The cash assistance to small and medium businesses, it's tailored in a way to keep people working and then keeping them able to return to work. And I think we've all got to remember it is not in anybody's interests to not try and get back up on their feet and keep their workers and rebound back from this.
Well,
David,
Chris Richardson,
highlight the business measures that were announced by the government have now been extended to the not-for-profit and community sector, and we really welcome that. Okay. We're wanting to see job security, services continuity as well, and so we're going to work very carefully with the union movement and the government to make sure that we get the result out of the cash flow measures that have been announced.
Chris Richardson, can I just come back to you, perhaps for a bit of an explanation about how they've designed this? Different countries are trying different approaches here to keep businesses where they can to hold on to their staff. Even if they can't continue operating, they can't open their doors to customers, to keep the employees on the books. Just explain to us what this government is attempting to do with this model.
So in the package today, there are incentives for people to keep paying things. It's not as big as you're seeing in the UK or France, which means it's not as expensive as that. What you're getting in the likes of the UK and France may be a little more open to rorting, but it's not a bad model, and it's simpler and people can understand it better. We may end up with that. The Prime Minister's essentially saying whatever it takes. The key, though, is that whatever we do has to be done fast. With the numbers going the way they are, especially in health, the value of a decision made today is 4 times more than the exact same decision made in a week's time. And that speed, so to some extent, we just need to keep agreeing. I'm happy with what we saw today out of the feds. I'm going to be happy with the increasing shutdowns we see out of the states. We don't have too much time for debate. There is, basically hunker down, and in particular, making the health system, getting its capacity as big as fast as we can is going to be vital.
One of the slightly contentious elements of today's package is also allowing workers in strife to dip into their super up to $10,000 this financial year, and again another $10,000 next financial year. Michelle O'Neill, let me ask you about this. Do you have any problem with that? This is people's money meant to be for retirement, but is this a time of crisis they should be able to dip into it?
Through. Again, it's a measure that is designed for the very lowest paid to be able to drain what is going to be their retirement income. And the problem with that, for example, is that if you fall below $10,000, and many of the lowest paid workers, mainly women and workers in vulnerable positions, if they do that, they then, in the middle of a health crisis, are also losing their death and disability insurance. And that is a serious consequence here. I mean, we think that there should be measures that directly support keeping people in jobs and keeping their income up. And it is very unfair that ultimately the lowest paid are going to have a long-term impact for their retirement.
Yeah, I just wanted to make the point, though, this is an option for them. They don't have to do it. It's on top of the support that we've been discussing,
That's right.
double New Start payments.
It is an option, David, but you understand that people have only heard today about the additional measures, and many people are fearful and are desperate. And what we need to do is make sure that those that have the least are the most supported. And this is not a way of doing this, because it's actually committing them to long-term poverty. Meaning we already have a problem in terms of the lowest paid and women in particular having not enough super to retire and not be in poverty. So this will entrench this for generations. It is really important that we have direct money that goes both in the welfare system so people have enough to get by if they're out of work, and today's measures are welcomed in that, but also, and most importantly, that we keep people in jobs and we keep the income flowing without having a long-term impact of them being assigned to poverty.
Jennifer
David,
Westacott.
if I can highlight just on this issue of timing and desperate stakes, I do think some of these payments need to come in quicker. I mean, the doubling of the New Start payment won't be until the 27th of April. So I know that's going to be a topic in the Parliament. I just really urge everybody to work hard to see if we can get these payments coming in earlier, because people are really in desperate stakes and we don't want people to be accessing super in the way that Michelle is expressing her concerns.
Jennifer Westacott, can I ask you, a lot of workers right now are contemplating whether they can work from home. A lot of businesses are working out how many of their workforce can work from home as we contemplate more widespread shutdowns. What's your perspective on this? Easier for some, not so easy for others. How is the workforce as we know it going to change?
Look, I think it is a horses for courses thing. There are some organisations where it's not as difficult to get people working from home. Things where there aren't customer-facing people. We're seeing a lot of companies also divide teams into A and B teams so that people aren't working in the office at the same time. I mean, I've seen just this incredible response from Australia's biggest companies, particularly, supporting casuals if they get sick or if they have to kind of self-quarantine. Telstra introducing a whole new form of pandemic leave. But I do think it will change the way we think about attending work and that whole flexibility that people have wanted about the way people work and how they work from home. But it does bring its challenges. There are big challenges around cybersecurity. There are big challenges around, how do we keep records of time and attendance? It's one of the things we want some more flexibility on. But, there's no doubt that there are some companies that it just is not going to work to do that because they have customer-facing people. And that's why the focus there has got to be on very safe workplaces, very safe arrangements with customers, but it's simply not practical in some cases to actually have people working from home.
But
Chris?
David, can I also just add about that? We've had an analysis of this done in the last few days, and in fact, close to 2/3 of the workforce are not in jobs where it's possible to do it from home. So, of course, where that is possible, it should be done, and that people should be supported and assisted in every way to do that. But we've got to be realistic. 2/3 of the Australian workforce are not in jobs that allow them to be done in the home.
Yeah, it's a very good point. Chris Richardson, let me perhaps finish with you. It's easy for people to be very scared right now, very gloomy about what's happening, rightly so. But the point the Prime Minister keeps making is this is finite. Yes, could be at least 6 months, could be more than that, but it will come to an end. Perhaps these are conversations that we will have down the track, but is this going to transform our economy permanently? Is this going to affect the way we work permanently?
It's going to hurt. It's going to affect the way we work, but it will end. And whether it's in 6 months or 12 months or perhaps even 18 months, Australia will look like it looked, in February, and we will get back there. It's a terrible time. We're all in this together. Federal, state, Reserve Bank, superannuation system, the banks, and as individuals washing our hands and keeping a distance. It's going to be hell, but there is another side.
Yeah, and Chris, just finally, the fact that we have seen the Reserve Bank, the private banks, the government working together so closely over the last week, I guess many would expect that to happen, but it is a good thing to see.
Yeah, and the key is the earlier we act, the faster we act, the better we're off in terms of both our health and our own economy. When a problem goes like that, of course we're rushing to do it. But so far you are seeing Australia do very well, and I would still much prefer to be here and facing this crisis than any other nation.
Yeah, a good point to finish on. Look, I want to thank you all for a constructive discussion tonight, and no doubt as this continues it'll be worth talking to you again. Thank you all. And we know from the Prime Minister, don't we, today, that there will be more announcements. There will be more spending from the government if it's required. We're certainly not even at the end of the beginning of this crisis. Well, that's all for this special program on the coronavirus. You can follow all the latest developments on this unfolding situation by going to abc.net.au/coronavirus. And don't forget the Coronacast, the daily research and news podcast with Norman Swan. You find it on your ABC list.
Next on ABC and iView, a peaceful protest turns chaotic when Stateless continues. Then the season final of A Very English Scandal.